All right, how's it going today, everyone? We are going to be taking a look mostly at sleep stages and dreams today, but we're also going to I'm going to intro this by talking a little bit about consciousness. So consciousness is one of those ideas in psychology um, where it is something that we have like a grasp of. We kind of understand what it is, but there are so many depths to it that um, kind of goes past our understanding. Consciousness is simply our awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. So how aware you are of what is happening to you and what is happening around you. So that's what consciousness is. But once again, this is one of our um, concepts that has a lot of unknowns to it. So to kind of give you an example of this would be, think about the first time you ever drove a car or the first time you ever rode a bike. Um, how much of your concentration was focused on making sure that you stayed balanced on a bike or making sure that you stayed in the lane on the road. You would say that 100% of your awareness was going on in that time. But now think of your 100th time riding a bike or your 100th time driving a car. Your consciousness is a little bit all over the place. You see a lot of people texting on their phones or daydreaming while they're driving because they don't need all of their attention squarely focused on making sure that they stay in the lane. So that's what we're going to be kind of looking at, some of these different levels of consciousness, and then we'll get into the different sleep stages. So let's take a look at some of these other levels of consciousness. So I have this kind of entire graph for consciousness, and you don't really need to know all of this. They've taken a lot of this out and condensed it, but I did want to kind of jump on it really quick and just talk about some things before we really dive into the section on sleep and dreams, because this is really, they want you to know this, and they want you to know this, not the meditation part, but the drug-induced part, and that's about all they're really concerned with. So this is kind of like the different levels of consciousness that you have here. Unconsciousness, being the closest thing to death. It is the thing where we have the least amount of awareness. If you've ever been ever gotten surgery before and had to be put under, you're going unconscious. And for a lot of us, you have the countdown. So it's 10, 9, 8, 7, you wake up. Time doesn't seem to pass. You aren't aware of what's going on. You just go under, and the next really waking moment is you in the hospital bed, no in between. And so when we talk about something like sleep and dreams is on this scale of consciousness. There is still a certain amount of alertness that we have when we are sleeping. We get woken up in the middle of the night. Sometimes, where some people are really light sleepers and are easily awoken, and others are very difficult to wake up. So these are just kind of different levels of consciousness. And then we have this altered state. We looked at different types of drugs and how they induce and how they influence our awareness of our surroundings. So think of something like hallucinogen, which might completely alter the way that we understand what's going on by heightening our view of something, or creating something that is completely not there, or a stimulant that gives us increased awareness of our surroundings. These are some altered states. They used to have us talk about hypnosis. They don't really have us talk about hypnosis, and all of this stuff, just kind of different ways that we process and live in the world. We've all been in a place where we're daydreaming and fantasizing. I'm sure plenty of you are doing it while watching this video, just kind of trailing off into the aether. So automatic processes, the things that we don't really have to think about, such as walking, talking in the most sense. Most of our conversation just kind of flows. and then control process, the things that we're actively trying to do, learn something new, you know, like play a very difficult instrument, certain things that we have to like really focus on and think about. That's our control processing. And once again, these are just varying levels of consciousness. Your awareness of what's going on in the world fluctuates continuously, and you kind of have a little spectrum here. So now let's dive into sleep stages, sleeping and the sleep stages. So you have on Schoology your kind of big sheet on the different sleep stages, and we're going to use that to really kind of talk about the different stages, and you'll just use that to highlight and understand things. So what we have here is we have the brain activity as measured by an EEG. So if you remember from earlier on when we were talking about EEGs, the electroencephalogram is the brain machine that measures brain activity that travels across the surface of the cerebral cortex. And so all those little, I was talking about it being like a Richter scale or a lie detector test, all those little movements tell us something. So in the 1920s, when we were first kind of discovering this, well, what we're seeing is we're seeing how much brain activity there is. So you see this, beta waves mean that the person is awake, normal, and conscious. So for most of the day, you are exhibiting mostly beta waves. You're awake, you're cognizant of what's going on in the world, paying attention. Okay, so then you have alpha waves. This is relaxed, calm meditation. This is also where you'll start to see the first person. You'll see a lot of alpha waves in stage 1 of sleep as the person begins to fall asleep. Theta waves are next. This is where you'll start seeing theta waves also in your second stage of sleep, and this is kind of like that transitional piece. You're going to start moving into actual sleep here. And then down here we have our delta waves, where you are in deep, deep sleep. Okay, so this is like our stage 3, stage 4. We'll talk about all these stages in a little bit. But this is where a person is really under really very asleep, and very little is going on in the brain. And you can see this like, oh, this is a brain that's very active. It's starting to slow down. Okay, I can really see that it's not doing as much. And then you look at this bottom one and you're just like, oh wow, the brain is totally out. It's really just not doing much of anything. So we use these different types of waves in order to understand, okay, what type of stage of sleep is this person in? So let's talk about the different stages of sleep, and then we'll kind of attach each of those stages to these different waves. Okay, so here is the slide that we're going to talk about sleep stages. I highly recommend that you have the sleep stages like page with all of the info on it. The best thing for you to do is just kind of highlight as I go through. There's just tons of information, and it's just a little easier if you just have it and you can highlight it as we talk about it. So our sleep is broken up into 5 stages, NREM 1 through 4, and then we have REM sleep at the end. NREM stands for non-REM sleep, and REM sleep stands for rapid eye movement sleep. And we'll talk about what that means here in a little bit. So let's just start with non-REM sleep. So stages 1 through 4 are all significant because they're not REM sleep. And then I'll tell you, REM is kind of like the big stage of sleep. And we'll talk about that here at the end. So NREM stage 1, I'm just going to call them stage 1 through 4 now, from now on. So stage 1 is basically the beginning of sleep. This is the transition from wakefulness to asleep. So a person that is in this stage is going to be mostly showing alpha waves, and then starting to move into some theta waves as they begin to kind of transition into that sleep. You'll see this in your classes when you see a student falling asleep. They're kind of like lying down on their desk, and then the teacher will come up and like smack their desk, and they pop up, and very often what they'll say is like, I was awake, and or I wasn't asleep. And generally speaking, if they report saying that, generally that is true. It usually takes a person to get from stage 1 to stage 2 about 7 to 10 minutes to really fall asleep. And so you'll have a person in class that's got their eyes closed and the teacher wakes them up and they're like, oh, I wasn't asleep. Generally, they're still in phase 1. Now, another kind of weird thing that happens is what is known as a positive myoclonus or a hypnic jerk. This is where, once again, you're kind of sleeping, you're in stage 1, and your arm or your leg or some part of your body just like jerks out. That's positive myoclonus. It's totally normal. Happens to everyone. I'm sure everyone here has watching has had that situation happen before where they're sleeping and then suddenly their arm like jerks out and they're like, oh my gosh, I hope nobody noticed. That's just part of being in stage 1. So once again, stage 1, you're not technically asleep, but you're transitioning to sleep. So the transition from stage 1 to stage 2 would be the onset of sleep. This is when you're actually like considered asleep. What you're mostly going to see for brain waves are going to be theta waves, and really for stage 2, you spend quite a bit of time, like anywhere between about 50% of the time that you are asleep. You spend in stage 2. And so that's where you're going to see those theta waves. Now, a big thing that you need to remember about stage 2, and kind of the only thing that you need to remember, are the sleep spindles and K complexes. Basically, they're just bursts of activity in the theta waves. So when you go and you look at those theta waves, you'll see like these bursts of activity, and then it slows down, burst of activity. That is just some spikes in brain activity, and it's just basically a key point like, hey, that's stage 2. So whenever you see it on an exam or a test, sleep spindles, K complexes, just recognize that's a stage 2 thing. So next we're going to move into stage 3, and stage 3 is where we're going to see our delta waves. This is the deepest stage of sleep. This is where the person is most totally knocked out. Like it's difficult to wake them up. If you wake up during stage 3, stage 4, you are the most groggy. It's, if you ever had like a good 8 hours sleep at night and then you woke up and you're like, I feel terrible, it's very likely that you woke up during stage 3 or stage 4. Once again, this is where we're going to see our delta waves. And this is where a lot of our body is going to get a lot of its like regeneration. The body like kind of gets a chance to really get back a lot of its energy. Now, the last stage is the stage that many of you have probably already heard of. This is REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. Generally about 20 to 25% of the time that you're sleeping is going to be in REM sleep. This is known as the paradoxical sleep because while your body becomes paralyzed, your brain actually becomes very active. So during stage 3, stage 4, which, like I said, we just clumped together. During stage 3, stage 4, you're going to see those delta waves, nice and slow delta waves. A person who's reading the EEG is like, wow, this person's totally asleep. And then what you're going to see in REM sleep is you're going to see those beta waves. The beta waves are normally what we see when we're fully conscious and awake. And so what you're seeing is that the brain is highly active during REM sleep. And that is because you are dreaming during this time. So everyone dreams at night. It's just kind of a case of whether or not you remember it. You all have multiple dreams every night. Just kind of depends on if you're going to remember it. The brain is wildly active. Now, REM sleep is also known as the paradoxical sleep, and the reason why it's called that is because while the brain is very active, the body is completely paralyzed. Now, the reason why the body is completely paralyzed is because if I were to ride a bicycle, there are certain parts of our brain that would be active. So let's just say It would be this part of the brain, and this part of the brain would be active if I was riding a bicycle. It'd be a lot more, but whatever. Okay, so these two parts of the brain would be active when I was actually physically awake and riding a bicycle. When you go to sleep and you have a dream, if I dreamt about being on a bicycle, those same parts of the brain would activate, and so I would like be pedaling or doing whatever it would be to do a bicycle. So the body is paralyzed, so we don't act out our dreams. You know, no one needs to be riding around on a bike when they're trying to go when they're sleeping. So it's kind of a defense mechanism. So once again, REM sleep, paradoxical sleep. Your brain is very active, but your body is paralyzed. Now let's take a look at this picture here. So when we're taking a look at this picture, one of the things that I want to make clear is that when we are sleeping, you don't go stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, REM sleep, rest of the night, and you're done. We go through cycles of them. So you know, starting at stage 1, you spend some time in that, you drop down to stage 2, spend some time in that, stage 3, stage 4, so spend some time. And as you can see, this is kind of that brain activity. The brain activity spikes when we get up to REM sleep. We spend a little time in there. And then same thing, we just kind of jump through, we go through the cycles again and again and again, just popping up to this REM sleep, going down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Generally speaking, it takes about 90 minutes to go through all 5 stages of REM sleep. So it takes about 90 minutes to go through, and so depending on how many hours of sleep you're going to get in a night, it tells you how much you're going to go through these different stages. So once again, this is totally normal. This is just how you get through a night's rest. So there are the sleep stages. Okay, so real quick concept to talk about, known as REM rebound. Just something that you need to remember. So throughout the week, oftentimes we don't get as much sleep as we're supposed to. So for teenagers, you guys should get minimum 8 hours of sleep a night, but you know, things don't always work out that way. So let's say that every night you get about 6 hours of sleep. Do a little multiplication, times 5, you get 30 hours of sleep. Okay, so if you're getting 30 hours of sleep every week, when you're supposed to get 40, what you are going to create is you are going to create what is known as sleep debt. So you have 10 hours of sleep debt. You need 10 hours of sleep in order to get back to normal. So for a lot of us, we use the weekend to catch up on our sleep debt. So what's going to happen is, you know, the question is do I have to sleep an extra 10 hours to catch up? And that is not the case. What is going to happen is during REM rebound, if you are trying to catch up on your Z's, is you're basically going to sleep more powerfully. You'll have more powerful dreams. So remember how we were looking at the sleep cycle. This is a great drawing of it. The sleep cycle, and you were going through the different stages, and it took about 90 minutes to do that. Well, because of REM rebound and your sleep is better, it's only going to approximately take you about 80 minutes to get through a sleep cycle. This is just an example. It takes you less time to get through a sleep cycle, and your REM sleep lasts for a longer period of time, which gives you more regenerative, makes you feel better. This is why when you go to bed on Friday night and you sleep in on Saturday, why you oftentimes feel super refreshed. When you don't have an alarm clock, you don't have a reason to get up, your body often wakes up normally, so it's not going to wake up during stage 3 and stage 4, but when it wakes up normally, you're going to feel really refreshed, and because you've gotten the hours of sleep that you needed, you'll feel ready to tackle the day. And that's part of REM rebound, as your body tries to catch up on the sleep. And so I'm sure we've all had weeks where we didn't get a lot of sleep. In the next few days, you slept really hard. That's REM rebound, as our body tries to play catch up with the hours that we missed. So next we have the different sleep disorders. We're just going to kind of rattle through these really quickly. We got a few that we need to look at, so let's talk about them. Most of them you've already have heard of. So insomnia. Insomnia is the most common of the sleep disorders. Basically, it is a person who struggles to fall asleep or struggles to stay asleep, both or one or the other. It's the most common sleep disorder in the US. And basically, it's just absolutely miserable. For those of you who have experienced it, you could have just a really long, tiring, exhausting day, lots of stuff happening emotionally, physically, mentally. And then when you go to sleep, for Mr. Monk, like, I'm just crashed, I'm out. But for people with insomnia, it doesn't matter how tired they are, they just can't fall asleep. Their body just won't let them do it. And for other people, when they do fall asleep, they can't stay asleep. So they'll fall asleep and then they're up not long after. So that's insomnia. If you know anyone that has it, it's pretty miserable. So the next is narcolepsy. So narcolepsy happens when the person has basically unstoppable, uncontrollable sleep attacks. A person with narcolepsy oftentimes needs to sleep anywhere between 18 to 20 hours a day, sometimes a little bit less. Maybe 16 to 20 is a little bit a better number. Oftentimes this comes as stress. I think in movies and television you see people like walking around and then all of a sudden they'll just, while standing up, fall asleep. It's not really how it goes. It's very often caused by high amounts of stress. The body kind of overworks itself and then it needs to sleep, and so it'll be like, oh goodness, I need to go, I need to lie down, and then they'll go and they'll find somewhere to sit down or lie down, and then out they go. So it's a pretty difficult disorder to have. When you're having to sleep so much during the day, and when it's difficult for you to control when it happens. Falling asleep at the wheel, you can't drive, it's not safe. Having a job, that's going to be pretty difficult. If it gets stressful, you're going and taking a nap. Same thing with school, taking tests or whatever, falling asleep. This can be a very, very difficult disorder to kind of, work through and, live. Just tough. So next we have sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is basically where the patient stops breathing in the middle of the night. This is another very common sleep disorder, mostly caused by people being overweight. Basically, their body just stops breathing in the middle of the night. And so with sleep apnea, you're never going to suffocate. Overnight, your body's gonna, rip you out and make sure that you get a breath of air. But patients with sleep apnea snore a lot as its body is desperately trying to breathe. And one of the big struggles for patients with sleep apnea is that when they do get a full night's rest, get good 8, maybe even 9 hours of sleep, they're oftentimes still very, very drowsy the next day and feel miserable. Well, the reason for that is, let's take another look at my handy dandy sleep stages. Okay. All right, so here's some of the sleep stages. Now, what is happening is the patient is waking up, is going to bed, and because of their sleep apnea, their body is waking them up. Oh, that's not a good color. Their body is waking them up at random times in the night. Okay. Now, the problem with this is that when they wake up, they don't continue on. They don't, just continue on with the track. No. They've got to start all over again. So every time they wake up, they've got to restart their schedule, and no amount of REM rebound is going to save them from. Okay, so next we have sleepwalking and sleep talking. So sleepwalking and sleep talking are both most common in children, and they both happen in stages 3 and stage 4. And so if you just take a second to think about it, you can kind of recognize why. Basically, it's the person is dreaming while in stages 3 and 4, so they're not paralyzed, and that's why they're moving around. So that's sleepwalking, sleep talking, most common in children. It's fairly rare in adults. Most of the reason why it happens with children is their sleep cycles are a little bit messed up in comparison to adults, and so they have, they have some more of the kind of moving around. It's just much more common for a child to have it than an adult. And finally, we have night terrors. So night terrors are pretty rough. Most often, again, it happens with children. The major difference between a nightmare and a night terror is that the person who has the night terror cannot remember what they were dreaming about. Once again, this happens in stage 3 and stage 4. Most often happens in children, and most often happens from children who are dealing with some sort of trauma. It's a pretty scary thing. The child wakes up screaming, crying, parent comes in, consoles them, asks them what's wrong, they don't remember it. So those are night terrors, once again, most often tied with some type of trauma, and it happens during stage 4. Children, stage 3 and 4, children are the most likely people to have night terrors. So